So, Chapter 39. The Guests. On the morning of the 21st of May, in the house in the Rue de Helder where Albert de Morcerf, while in Rome, had agreed to meet the Count of Monte Cristo, everything was being prepared to honour the young man's word. Albert de Morcerf lived in a pavilion, or lodge, in the corner of a large courtyard, opposite another building containing the outhouses. Only 2 windows of the lodge overlooked the street, 3 of the others being in the wall looking across the courtyard, and 2 at right angles overlooking the garden. Between the court and the garden, built with the bad taste of the Empire style in architecture, was the vast and fashionable residence of the Count and Countess de Morcerf. The whole extent of the property was surrounded by a wall, abutting on the street, crowned at intervals with vases of flowers, and broken in the middle by a large wrought-iron gateway with gilded lances, which was used for formal comings and goings. A little door, almost next to the concierge's lodge, was intended for the servants or for the masters, if they should be coming in or going out on foot. One could guess that there was the delicate forethought of a mother behind this choice of the pavilion for Albert. While not wanting to be separated from her son, she nevertheless realized that a young man of the Viscount's age needed all his freedom. On the other hand, it must be said that one could also recognize in this the intelligent egoism of the young man, the son of wealthy parents, who enjoyed the benefits of a free and idle life, which was gilded for him like a birdcage. Through the windows that overlooked the street, Albert de Morcerf could explore the outside world. Life outdoors is so essential to young men, who always want to see the world pass over their horizon, even if that horizon is bounded by the street. Then, once his preliminary exploration was finished, if it should reveal anything that deserved closer examination, Albert de Morcerf could pursue his investigation by going out through a little door corresponding to the one already noted near the porter's lodge, which deserves particular mention. It was a little door that you would have thought forgotten by everyone on the very day that the house was built, and which you would imagine was condemned to eternal neglect, so dusty and well concealed did it seem, except that, on close examination, the lock and the hinges, assiduously oiled, showed it to be in continual and mysterious use. This sly little door competed with its 2 fellows, and cocked a snook at the concierge, escaping both his vigilance and his jurisdiction, to open like the famous cavern door in the 1001 Nights, like Ali Baba's enchanted sesame, only by means of some occult phrase or some prearranged tapping, spoken in the softest of voices or performed by the slenderest fingers in the world. At the end of a wide, peaceful corridor, entered through this little door and serving as an antechamber to the apartments, were 2 rooms. On the right, Albert's dining room, overlooking the court, and on the left his little drawing room, overlooking the garden. Banks of climbing plants, fanned out in front of the windows, hid the interior of these 2 rooms from the court and the garden. Since they were the only ones on the ground floor, they were also the only ones which might be spied upon by prying eyes. On the first floor, the 2 rooms were repeated with the addition of a third, above the antechamber. The 3 first-floor rooms were a drawing-room, a bedroom, and a boudoir. The downstairs drawing-room was only a smoking-room, like an Algerian diwan. The first-floor boudoir led into the bedroom, and by a secret door to the staircase. One can see that every precaution had been taken. Above the first floor was a vast studio which had been enlarged by taking down the inner walls and partitions to make a domain of chaos in which the artist battled for supremacy over the dandy. Here was the resting place in which were amassed all Albert's successive whims, hunting horns, basses and flutes, a full orchestra, because Albert had once conceived not a taste for music, but a fancy. Easels, palettes and pastels, because the fancy for music had been followed by a fad for painting, and last of all, foils, boxing gloves, swords and sticks of every variety, because finally In the way of fashionable young men at the time when our story is set, Albert de Morcerf gave infinitely greater application than he had done to music and painting to the three arts that go to make up the education of a member of the dominant class in society, namely fencing, boxing, and exercising with the quarterstaff. In this room, designed for all kinds of physical exertion, he would receive successively Grisier, Cooks, and Charles Le Boucher. The remaining furniture in this special room consisted of chests dating from the time of François I, full of Chinese porcelain, Japanese vases, faience by Luca della Robbia, and plates by Bernard de Palissy, and antique chairs on which Henri IV or Sully, Louis XIII or Richelieu might have sat, for two of them, bearing carved blue shields on which shone the French fleur-de-lis surmounted by a royal crown, clearly came from the collection at the Louvre, or at least from some other royal palace. Across the chairs, with their dark upholstery, were casually draped rich materials in bright colours, dyed in the Persian sun or brought to light beneath the fingers of women in Calcutta or Chanagana. It was impossible to say what these fabrics were doing there. They were awaiting some destiny unknown even to their owner, providing sustenance for the eyes, and meanwhile setting the room ablaze with their silken and golden lights. In the place of honour was a piano, made of rosewood by Roller and Blanchet, and designed to fit into a modern drawing-room, yet containing a whole orchestra within its compact and sonorous frame, and groaning under the weight of masterpieces by Beethoven, Weber, Mozart, Haydn, Grétry, and Porpora. Then everywhere along the walls, above the doors, on the ceiling, were swords, daggers, kriss, maces, axes, complete suits of gilded, damascened or encrusted armour, as well as herbaria, blocks of mineral samples, and stuffed birds spreading their brilliant, fiery wings in immobile flight and opening beaks that were never closed. It goes without saying that this room was Albert's favourite. However, on the day fixed for the meeting, the young man, dressed but wearing casual indoor clothes, had set up his headquarters in the little ground-floor drawing-room. Here, on a table set some way from the divan that surrounded it, and magnificently displayed in the crackled faience pots that the Dutch appreciate so much, were all the known varieties of tobacco, from yellow Petersburg to black Sinai, through Maryland, Puerto Rico, and Latakia. Beside them, in boxes of aromatic wood and in order of size and quality, were laid out puros, regalias, Havanas, and Manillas. And finally, on an open rack, a collection of German pipes, chibouks with amber bowls decorated with coral, and nargils encrusted with gold, their long Morocco stems twisted like serpents, awaited the smoker's preference or whim. Albert himself had supervised the arrangement, or rather the systematic disorder that guests at a modern luncheon like to contemplate through the smoke as it escapes from their lips and rises in long, fantastic spirals towards the ceiling. At 9:45, a valet de chambre came in. This was a little 15-year-old groom, who spoke nothing but English and answered to the name of John. He was Morcerf's only servant. Of course, on ordinary days the cook from the main house was at his disposal, as was also on grand occasions his father the Count's lackey. The valet de chambre, who was called Germain and who enjoyed his young master's entire confidence, was holding a bundle of newspapers, which he put down on a table, and a packet of letters which he gave to Albert. Albert glanced casually at the various missives and chose two, with perfumed envelopes addressed in fine hands. These he unsealed and read with a certain amount of attention. "How did these letters come?" he asked. "One came by the post, the other was brought by Madame Danglars' valet." Let Madame Danglars know that I accept the place she is offering me in her box. Then during the day go to Rosa's and tell her that in accordance with her invitation I shall sup with her on leaving the opera, and take her 6 bottles of different wines, Cyprus, sherry, Malaga, and a barrel of Ostend oysters. Buy the oysters from Borel and make sure he knows that they are for me. And at what time would Monsieur like to be served? What time is it now? 10:15. Well, serve breakfast at exactly 10:30. Debray may be obliged to go into his ministry, and in any case— Albert looked at his notebook. That was the time I agreed with the Count. May the 21st at 10:30 in the morning. Even though I don't set much store by his promise, I want to be punctual. Do you know if the Countess is up? If Monsieur le Vicomte wishes, I can find out. Do. Ask her for one of her liqueur cabinets. Mine is not fully replenished. And tell her that I shall have the honour to visit her at about 3 o'clock, and should like her permission to introduce her to someone. When the valet had left, Albert slumped onto the divan, tore the wrappings off 2 or 3 newspapers, looked at the theatre programmes, winced on seeing that they were performing an opera and not a ballet, hunted in vain through the advertisements for cosmetics for an electuary for the teeth that he had heard mentioned, and successively tossed aside 2 or 3 of the most read prints in Paris, muttering in the midst of a prolonged yawn, "Really, these papers do get more and more frightfully dull." At that moment a light carriage pulled up in front of the door, and a moment later the valet returned to announce Monsieur Lucien Debray. A tall young man, fair-haired, pale, with a confident grey eye and cold, thin lips, wearing a blue coat with engraved gold buttons, a white cravat, and a monocle in a tortoise-shell rim dangling from a silk cord, which, by a coordinated effort of the superciliary and zygomatic arches, he managed from time to time to secure in the cavity of his right eye, came in without smiling or speaking, and with a semi-official bearing. "Good morning, Lucien, good morning," Albert said. But you terrify me, my dear fellow, with your punctuality. What am I saying? Punctuality! I was expecting you last of all, and you arrive at 5 to 10, when the invitation was definitely fixed only at 50:30. It's a miracle. Can this mean that the government is overthrown by any chance? No, my dearest fellow, the young man said, planting himself on the divan. Rest assured, we are always unsteady, but we never fall. I'm beginning to think that we are becoming utterly unmovable, even without the affairs of the peninsula, which are going to fix us in place once and for all. Yes, that's right. You are getting rid of Don Carlos of Spain. Not at all, dearest fellow. We must put this straight. We are taking him across the French frontier and entertaining him most royally in Bruges. In Bourges, sorry. In Bourges? Yes, and he has no grounds for complaint, damn it! Bourges is King Charles VII's capital. What, you hadn't heard? All Paris has known about it since yesterday, and it had already reached the stock exchange the day before that, because Monsieur Danglars— I haven't the slightest idea how that man manages to learn everything as soon as we do— Danglars bet on a bull market and won $1 million. And you a new ribbon, apparently. Isn't that a blue band I can see with the rest of your decorations? They sent me the Charles III medal, you know, Debray answered in an offhand manner. Oh, come now, don't pretend you're not pleased. Admit that you're glad to have it. Well, yes, so I am. As a fashion accessory, a medal looks quite fine on a high-buttoned black frock coat. Very elegant. And— Morcerf said, smiling, it makes one look like the Prince of Wales or the Duke of Reichstadt. Which is why you are seeing me at this time in the morning, my dearest fellow. Because you wanted me to let me know they had given you the Charles III medal? No, because I spent the night sending out letters, 25 diplomatic dispatches. When I arrived home this morning at dawn, I tried to sleep, but I was overcome with a headache, so I got up to go out for an hour's ride. In the Bois de Boulogne I was overcome with hunger and boredom, 2 enemies that rarely attack together, but despite that were leagued against me in a sort of Carlist Republican alliance. It was then that I remembered we are feasting with you this morning, so here I am. I am hungry. Feed me. I am bored. Entertain me." "It is my duty as your host to do both, dear friend," said Albert, ringing for his valet, while Lucien turned over the folded newspapers with the tip of a switch which he held by its gold knob inlaid with turquoise. "Germain, a glass of sherry and a biscuit. And while you are waiting for those, dear Lucien, take a cigar. Contraband, naturally. I insist that you try one, and suggest that to your ministry that they sell us the same, instead of those dried walnut leaves that they condemn conscientious citizens to smoke." "Pooh, certainly not. As soon as you knew they came from the government, you would find them abominable and refuse to touch them. In any case, it's nothing to do with the Home Office. It's a matter for the Inland Revenue. Apply to Monsieur Human, Department of Indirect Taxes, Corridor A, Room 26. "Well, I never," said Albert. "I'm amazed at how much you know. But go on, take a cigar." "Ah, my dear Viscount," Lucien said, lighting a manila at a pink candle burning in a silver-gilt candlestick before slumping back onto the divan. "My dear Viscount, how lucky you are to have nothing to do. You really can't tell how lucky." "And what would you do, my jolly old pacifier of kingdoms," Morcerf asked with a hint of irony, "if you had nothing to occupy you? What? The minister's private secretary, engaged simultaneously in the great European cabal and in the petty intrigues of Parisian society, with kings, and better still queens, to protect, parties to unite, elections to manage, doing more from your study with your pen and your telegraph than Napoleon did from his battlefields with his sword and his victories, enjoying an income of 25,000 livres apart from your salary, and a horse that Chateaurenard offered to buy from you for 400 louis, which you refused to sell, and a tailor who never fails to make you a perfect pair of trousers, being able to go to the opera, the jockey club, and the Théâtre des Variétés. You have all this, and you are bored? Well, I have got something to entertain you." "What's that?" "I'm going to introduce you to someone." "Man or woman?" "Man." "Huh, I already know plenty of those." "Not like the one I am speaking about." "Where does he come from? The end of the world?" "Perhaps from even further than that." "No. Then I hope he's not bringing our breakfast." "Don't worry. Breakfast is being cooked in the kitchens of the maternal home. Are you hungry, then?" "I am ashamed to confess it, but I am. I had dinner yesterday at the home of Baron Danglars. I don't know if you've noticed, my friend, but one always dines very poorly with these stock exchange types. It's as though they had a guilty conscience." "You can afford to disparage other people's dinners, seeing the kind of spread one gets from your ministers." "Yes, but at least we don't invite respectable people. If we were not obliged to do the honours for some right-thinking and, above all, right-voting bumpkins, we would shun our own tables like the plague, believe me. In any case, my good fellow, have another glass of sherry and a biscuit." "With pleasure. Your Spanish wine is excellent. You see, we were quite right to pacify that country." "Yes, but what about Don Carlos?" "Let Don Carlos drink claret, and in 10 years will marry his son to the little queen." "Which should get you the Golden Fleece if you're still in the ministry." "I do believe, Albert, that you are quite set this morning on feeding me with illusions." "Ah, you must admit that's the diet that best satisfies the stomach. Oh, but wait, I can hear Bouchon's voice in the antechamber. You can have an argument, that'll pass the time." "Argument about what?" "About the newspapers." "Oh, my dear man," Lucien said, with sovereign contempt. "You think I read the papers?" "All the better. Then you can argue even more about them." "Monsieur Bouchon," the valet announced. Come in, acid pen," Albert said, getting up and going to meet the young man. "I have Debray here, as you can see. He hates you without even reading you, apparently." "He's quite right," said Beauchamp. "I'm just the same. I criticize him without knowing what he does. Good morning, Commandeur." "So you already know about that, do you?" the private secretary replied, smiling and shaking hands with the journalist. "As you see," said Beauchamp. And what are they saying about it out there? Out where? There are a lot of constellations out there in this year of grace 1838. In the critical political one where you shine so brightly. They say that it is well deserved, and that you have sown enough red for a little blue to spring from it. Now then, that's not bad at all, said Lucien. Why aren't you with us, my dear Beauchamp? With your wit, you could make your fortune in 3 or 4 years. I am quite ready to follow your advice as soon as I see a government that is guaranteed to last at least 6 months. Now, one word, dear Albert, because I must give poor Lucien a chance to draw breath. Are we to have breakfast or lunch? I am expected in the house. As you see, all is not roses in our profession. Just breakfast. We are waiting for 2 more guests, and we shall start as soon as they arrive. And what sort of people are these whom you are expecting for breakfast? A nobleman and a diplomat. Then we can expect to be kept waiting barely 2 hours for the nobleman and fully 2 hours for the diplomat. I'll come back for the last course. Keep me some strawberries, coffee, and cigars. I can take a lamb cutlet at the house. Oh, please don't do that, Beauchamp, because even if the nobleman were a Montmorency and the diplomat a Metternich, we should still take breakfast at exactly 10:30. Meanwhile, do what Debray is doing. Taste my sherry and biscuits. Very well, then, I'll stay. I really must have something to take my mind off things this morning. Well, you are just like Debray. I would have thought that when the government is sad, the opposition would be merry. Ah, you don't realise, old man, what is in store for me. This morning I shall have to sit through a speech by Monsieur Danglars in the lower house, and this evening at his wife's a tragedy by a peer of the realm. The devil take this constitutional government. They do say that we had a choice, so what did we choose this one for? I understand. You need to store up some merriment. Don't say anything against Monsieur Danglars' speeches, said Debray. He votes for your side. He's in the opposition. Damnation, that's the worst thing about it. That's why I'm waiting for you to boot him up into the upper house, where I can laugh at him as much as I like. My dear, Albert said to Beauchamp, it's plain to see that the Spanish business is settled. You're in a foul temper this morning, so I shall have to remind you that the gossip columns are talking about a marriage between myself and Mademoiselle Eugène Danglars. For that reason I cannot, in all conscience, allow you to speak ill of the eloquence of a man who one day could well be saying to me, "Oh, Monsieur le Vicomte, you know that I am giving my daughter a dowry of 2 millions. Be serious, said Beauchamp. The marriage will never take place. The king may have made him a baron. He could make him a peer of the realm, but he can never make him a gentleman. And the Comte de Morcerf comes of too aristocratic a line ever to agree to such a misalliance for a mere 2 million francs. The Vicomte de Morcerf must marry a marchioness at least. 2 million? It's a pretty sum, even so, said Morcerf. It's the working capital you would invest in a music hall or a railway line from the Jardin des Plantes to the Rapet. Take no notice, Morcerf, Debray said off-handedly. Get married. You will be marrying the label on a money bag, won't you? So what does it matter? Better that the label should have 1 more nought and 1 less shield on it. There are 7 blackbirds on your own coat of arms. Well, you can give 3 to your wife and still have 4 left for yourself. That is 1 more than Monsieur de Guise, who was nearly King of France and whose first cousin was Emperor of Germany. Lucien, by gad, I do believe you're right, Albert replied absent-mindedly. Of course I am. In any case, every millionaire is as noble as a bastard, or can be. Hush, don't say that, Debray, Beauchamp replied, laughing. Here is Château-Renard, who might well run you through with the sword of his ancestor, Renard de Montauban, to cure you of the habit of making such quips. Then he surely would be lowering himself, Lucien retorted, for I am low-born and very mean. Ha! Beauchamp exclaimed. Listen to this. The government sings Béranger. What are we coming to, for heaven's sake? Monsieur de Château-Renard, Monsieur Maximilien Morel, cried the valet de chambre, announcing the 2 new arrivals. All present and correct, said Beauchamp. Now we can eat. If I'm not mistaken, you were only expecting 2 more guests, Albert? Morel? Albert muttered in surprise. Morel? Who's that? Before he could finish, Monsieur de Châteaurenard, a handsome young man of 30 and an aristocrat from head to foot, that is to say, with the face of a Guiche and the wit of a Montemar, had seized Albert by the hand. My dearest, allow me to present Captain Maximilien Morel, my friend and, moreover, my saviour. In any event, the man presents himself well enough. Vicomte, salute my hero. At this he stood aside to reveal the tall, noble young man with the broad brow, piercing eye, and dark moustache, whom our readers will remember seeing in Marseille, in such dramatic circumstances that they cannot so soon have forgotten about them. His broad chest, decorated with the cross of the Legion of Honour, was shown off by a rich uniform, part French and part Oriental, worn magnificently, which also brought out his military bearing. The young officer bowed with elegant good manners. Every one of Morel's movements was graceful, because he was strong. Monsieur, said Albert, with courteous warmth, Monsieur le Baron de Châteaurenard already knew how much it would delight me to meet you. You are one of his friends, monsieur. Please be ours. Very well, said Châteaurenard, and hope, my dear Vicomte, that if the situation should arise, he will do the same for you as he did for me. What was that? Asked Albert. Please, Morel protested, it's not worth mentioning. The Baron exaggerates. What do you mean? Said Châteaurenard. It's not worth mentioning. Life is not worth mentioning. I must tell you that you are sounding a little bit too philosophical about it, my dear Morel. It is all very well for you, when you risk your life every day, but for me, who does so only once and by accident. If I understand you correctly, Baron, you are saying that Captain Morel saved your life? By God, he did, and that's the long and short of it, said Châteaurenard. On what occasion? Beauchamp asked. Beauchamp, old chap, you must know I'm dying of hunger, said Debray. Let's not start on any long stories. Very well, then, said Beauchamp. I certainly have no objection to sitting down at table. Châteaurenard can tell us about it over breakfast. Gentlemen, said Morcerf, please note that it is still only 10:15, and we are waiting for one last guest. Of course, that's right, said Debray. A diplomat. A diplomat or something else, I don't know what. All I do know is that I entrusted him with a mission on my behalf, which he carried out so much to my satisfaction that if I had been king I should have instantly made him a knight of all orders, including the garter and the golden fleece, if I had both to give. So, as we are not yet going in to breakfast, said Debray, pour yourself a glass of sherry, as we have done, Baron, and tell us all about it. You know that I got this notion of going to Africa. Your ancestors had already shown you the way, my dear Châteaurenard, Morcerf remarked elegantly. Yes, but I doubt if your purpose was, like theirs, to liberate the tomb of our Saviour. You are quite right, Beauchamp, said the young aristocrat. It was quite simply to get some amateur pistol shooting. As you know, I hate duels, since the time when 2 witnesses whom I had chosen to settle some dispute obliged me to break the arm of one of my best friends. Yes, by heaven, it was for poor Franz d'Épinay, whom you all know. Of course, that's right, said Debray. You did have a duel once. What was it about? The devil only knows. I can't remember, said Châteaurenard. What I clearly recall is that I felt ashamed at letting a talent like mine go to waste, and as I had been given some new pistols, I thought I'd try them out. So I set sail for Oran, and from Oran I went to Constantine, where I arrived just in time to witness the end of the siege. Like the rest, I joined the retreat. For the first 48 hours I was able to put up with the rain by day and the snow by night well enough. Then, at last, on the 3rd morning, my horse froze to death. Poor animal! It was used to a blanket and the stove in its stables. An Arab horse which just happened to find itself a little out of place in Arabia when the temperature dropped to -10. "That's why you wanted to buy my English horse," said Debray. "You thought he would stand the cold better than your Arab." No, you're wrong there, because I have sworn never to go back to Africa again." "So you had a really bad fright?" asked Beauchamp. "Yes, I confess I did," Chateau Renaud replied. "And I was right to be scared. As I said, my horse died, so I was continuing my retreat on foot when 6 Arabs bore down on me at a gallop, intending to cut off my head. I shot 2 with the 2 barrels of my gun, and another 2 with my 2 pistols, all right on target. But there were still 2 left, and I had no other weapons. One of them seized me by the hair, which is why I have it cut short nowadays, because you never know what might happen, and the other put his yataghan against my throat so that I could already feel the cold steel, when this gentleman here charged at them, shot dead with his pistol the one who was holding my hair, and used his sabre to crack open the skull of the one who was about to cut my throat. He had taken it upon himself to save a man that day, and, as luck would have it, I was the one. When I am rich, I shall have a statue of Luck made by Clagman or Marocchetti." "Yes," Morel said, smiling. "It was the 5th of September, which is the anniversary of a day on which my father's life was miraculously saved. So, whenever possible, I celebrate that day with some action." "Some heroic deed, you mean?" Chateau Renaud interrupted. "In short, I was the lucky man. But that is not all. After having saved me from the cold steel, he saved me from the cold itself. Not by giving me half of his cloak, as St. Martin did, but by giving me the whole of it. And then he saved me from hunger by sharing— guess what?" "A pâté from Chez Felix," suggested Beauchamp. "Not so. His horse. We each ate a piece of it with great relish. It was tough." "The horse?" Morcerf asked, laughing. "No, sacrificing it," Chateau Renaud replied. "Ask Debray if he would sacrifice his English horse for a stranger." "Not for a stranger," said Debray. "For a friend, perhaps." "I guessed that you would become mine, Baron," said Morel. "In any case, as I already told you, heroism or not, sacrifice or not, on that particular day I owed an offering to ill fortune as a reward for the favour that once good fortune did for us." "The story that Monsieur Morel refers to," Chateau Renaud continued, is a quite admirable one, which he will tell you one day when you know him better. For the present, let's line our stomachs instead of plundering our memories. When do we breakfast, Albert?" "At 10:30. "On the dot?" Debray asked, taking out his watch. "Oh, you must allow me the usual 5 minutes' grace," said Morcerf, "for I, too, am awaiting a saviour." "Whose?" "Why, my own," Morcerf replied. "Do you think me incapable of being saved like anyone else? It is not only Arabs who cut off heads, you know. Ours is to be a philanthropic breakfast, and I sincerely hope that we shall have 2 benefactors of mankind at our table." "How shall we manage?" asked Debray. "There is only one Prix Montyon." "Well, we shall just have to give it to someone who has done nothing to deserve it," said Beauchamp. "That's how the Academy usually solves the dilemma." "Where will he be coming from?" Debray asked. "Forgive my insisting. I know that you have already answered the question, but so vaguely that I feel entitled to answer it again. Ask it again." "To tell the truth," Albert said, "I don't know. When I invited him 3 months ago, he was in Rome, but since then who can tell where he may have been?" "Do you think he is capable of being punctual?" asked Debray. "I think he is capable of anything," Morcerf replied. "Note that with the 5 minutes' grace we now have only 10 minutes left." "Then I'll take advantage of it to tell you something about my guest." "I beg your pardon," said Beauchamp, "but is there the material for an article in what you're going to tell us?" "Certainly there is, and a very unusual one." "Then carry on. I can see that I won't get to the house, so I must make up for it in some way." "I was in Rome for the last carnival." "We know that much," said Beauchamp. "But what you don't know is that I was kidnapped by bandits." "There's no such thing as bandits," said Debray. "Yes, there are, and some very ugly ones, which means they were good bandits, because I found them pretty terrifying." "Come now, my dear Albert," said Debray. "Admit it, your cook is late, the oysters have not arrived from Marennes or Ostend, and like Madame de Maintenon, you want to make up for one course with a story. Carry on with it, old man. We are good enough guests to indulge you and listen to your tale, however incredible it may be." "I tell you, incredible though it may be, it is true from beginning to end. The bandits captured me and took me to a very melancholy spot called the Catacombs of Saint Sebastian." "I know them," said Chateaurenard. "I nearly caught a fever there." "I did better than that," said Morcerf. "I really caught something. They told me that I was a hostage for a ransom of the trifling amount of 4,000 Roman écus, or 26,000 livres. Unfortunately, I only had 1,500 left. I was at the end of my journey, and my credit was exhausted. I wrote to France. Oh, but of course! Listen, France was there. You can ask him if I am not telling the absolute truth. I wrote to Franz that if he did not come before 6 in the morning with the 4,000 écus, by 6:10 I should have joined the blessed saints and glorious martyrs in whose company I had the honour to find myself. And I can assure you that Monsieur Luigi Vampa, that was the name of my chief bandit, would have kept his word to the letter." "So Franz arrived with the 4,000 écus?" Chateaurenard said. "Of course he did. You are not short of 4,000 écus when your name is Franz d'Épinay or Albert de Morcerf." No, he arrived, but accompanied purely and simply by the guest I have promised you and to whom I hope to introduce you." "He must be a Hercules killing Cacus, this gentleman, or a Perseus delivering Andromeda." "No, he's a man of about my height." "Armed to the teeth?" "He did not have so much as a knitting needle." "But did he pay your ransom?" "He whispered 2 words to the chief bandit, and I was free." "They even apologized to him for arresting you?" said Beauchamp. "Exactly." "Well, I never! Was he Ariosto, this man?" "No, just the Count of Monte Cristo." "No one is called the Count of Monte Cristo," said Debray. "I think not," Chateaurenard added, in the unruffled tones of a man who has the entire nobility of Europe at his fingertips. "Does anyone know of a Count of Monte Cristo anywhere?" "Perhaps he comes from the Holy Land," said Beauchamp. "One of his ancestors might have owned cavalry, just as the Montmartres did the Dead Sea." "Excuse me, gentlemen," said Maximilien, "but I think I can solve the problem for you. Monte Cristo is a tiny island about which I have often heard speak from the sailors who were employed by my father. It is a grain of sand in the midst of the Mediterranean, an atom in infinity." "Just so, monsieur," said Albert, "and the person I am telling you about is the lord and king of this grain of sand, of this atom. He must have brought his deeds to the title of count somewhere in Tuscany." "Was your count rich, then?" "By gad, I think he is." "But it must show, surely." "That's where you're wrong, Debray." "I don't understand." "Have you read the 1001 Nights?" "Heavens, what an extraordinary question." "Well then, can you tell if the people in it are rich or poor? If their grains of wheat are not rubies and diamonds? They look like penniless fishermen, don't they? That's how you treat them, and suddenly they open up before you a mysterious cavern in which you find a treasure vast enough to purchase the Indies." So my Count of Monte Cristo is one of those fishermen. He even has an appropriate name. He calls himself Sinbad the Sailor, and he owns a cavern full of gold." "Have you seen this cavern, Morcerf?" asked Beauchamp. "No, I haven't. It was Franz who saw it. But hush, don't say a word about this in front of him. Franz was taken there blindfolded, and served by men and women beside whom, it appears, Cleopatra was nothing but a strumpet. However, he is not quite sure about the women, since they only appeared after he had consumed some hashish, so that it could well be that what he took for women were quite were in fact quite simply a group of statues. The young men looked at Morcerf as if to say, "My good fellow, have you lost your wits, or are you teasing us?" "It's true," Morel said pensively, "that I did hear something similar to what Monsieur de Morcerf is telling us from an old sailor called Penelon." "Ah!" Albert exclaimed, "it's a good thing that Monsieur Morel has come to my support. You're not pleased, are you, that he has trailed this ball of thread through my labyrinth?" "Forgive us, dear fellow," said Debray, "but what you are saying just seems too improbable." "Damnation! Just because your ambassadors and your consuls don't tell you anything about it. They don't have time. They're too busy molesting their compatriots whenever they go abroad." Now, you're getting angry and taking it out on our poor emissaries. Heavens above, how do you expect them to protect us? Every day the house nibbles away at their salaries, to the point where it is getting impossible to find anyone. Would you like to be an ambassador, Albert? I'll have you appointed to Constantinople." "No, thank you. Just so the Sultan, the first time I put in a good word for Mehmet Ali, can send round a rope for my secretaries to strangle me." "You see," said Debray, "but that does not mean that my Count of Monte Cristo does not exist." "Everybody exists. What a miracle." "No doubt everybody does exist, but not as he does. Not everybody has slaves, princely galleries, weapons like those in the Casuaba, horses worth 6,000 francs apiece, and Greek mistresses." "Did you see this Greek mistress?" "Certainly, saw and heard. I saw her at the Théâtre Valet, and heard her one day when I dined with the Count." "So he does eat, then, your extraordinary man?" "If he does eat, it is too little to be worth mentioning." "You see, he's a vampire." "Laugh if you wish. That was precisely the opinion of Countess G., who, as you know, was acquainted with Lord Ruthven." "Oh, that's fine," said Beauchamp. "For a man who is not a journalist, this is the answer to the Constitutionnel's famous sea serpent. A vampire. The very thing." "A savage eye with a pupil that is dilated or contracted at will," said Debray. "Highly developed facial angle, splendid forehead, livid colouring, black beard, teeth white and pointed, manners the same." "That's precisely it, Lucien," said Morcerf. "You have described him to a T. Yes, sharp and pointed manners. The man often made me shudder. For example, one day when we were together watching an execution, I thought I would faint, much more from seeing him and hearing him discourse coldly about all the sufferings imaginable than from seeing the executioner carry out his task and hearing the cries of the condemned man." "Didn't he take you for a stroll through the ruins of the Colosseum to suck your blood, Morcerf?" asked Beauchamp. "And after setting you free, didn't he make you sign some fiery coloured parchment, by which you ceded him your soul, like Esau his birthright?" Mock as much as you wish, gentlemen," said Morcerf, a trifle irritated. "When I look at you fine Parisians, regulars on the Boulevard de Gand, strollers through the Bois de Boulogne, and then remember that man, well, it strikes me that we are not of the same race." "Flattered," said Beauchamp. "The fact remains," Chateau Renaud added, "that your Count of Monte Cristo is a gentleman in his spare time, except for his little understandings with Italian bandits." "There are no Italian bandits," said Debray. "No vampires," Beauchamp added. "And no Count of Monte Cristo," concluded Debray. "Listen, my dear Albert, 10:30 is striking." "Admit that you had a nightmare, and let's start breakfast," said Beauchamp. But the echo of the striking clock had not yet died away when the door opened and Germain announced, "His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo." All those present started despite themselves, in a way indicating that Morcerf's story had touched something deep inside them. Even Albert could not avoid feeling faintly shocked. They had heard no sound of a vehicle in the street or a step in the antechamber, and even the door had opened silently. The Count was framed in it, dressed with the greatest simplicity. But the most demanding of dandies would not have found anything to criticise in his appearance. Everything, clothes, hat, linen, was in perfect taste and came from the finest suppliers. He seemed to be barely 35 years of age, and what struck everybody was how closely he resembled the portrait that Debray had sketched of him. He came forward, smiling, into the middle of the drawing-room, going directly towards Albert, who was advancing to meet him and affably holding out his hand. "Punctuality," said Monte Cristo, "is the politeness of kings, or so I believe one of your sovereigns claimed. However, it is not always that of travellers, despite their good intentions. I hope, dear Vicomte, that you will take my good intentions into consideration, and forgive me if, as I think, I am 2 or 3 seconds late for our rendezvous. It is impossible to cover 500 leagues without some small accidents, especially in France, where it appears that it is forbidden to whip a postilion." "Monsieur le Comte," Albert replied, "I was just announcing your imminent arrival to a few of my friends whom I invited to join us, in view of the promise that you were kind enough to make me, and whom I should like to introduce to you. They are Monsieur le Comte de Châteaurenard, who traces his noble lineage back to the paladins of Charlemagne, and whose ancestors sat at the Round Table; Monsieur Lucien Debray, private secretary to the Minister of the Interior; Monsieur Beauchamp, a fearful journalist and the scourge of the French government, of whom, despite his celebrity here, you may never have heard tell in Italy, since his newspaper is not distributed there; and finally Monsieur Maximilien Morel, a captain in the regiment of Spahi." Up to this point the Count had bowed courteously, but with a certain English coldness and impassivity, but at the last name he involuntarily stepped forward, and a faint touch of red passed like a flash across his pale cheeks. "Monsieur wears the uniform of the recent French victors," he said, "and it is a fine one." It was impossible to tell what emotion gave the Count's voice such a profoundly vibrant tone and made his eye shine, as if against his will, that eye which was so fine, so calm, and so clear when he had no reason to shade it. "You have never seen us African soldiers, monsieur?" said Albert. "Never," the Count replied, entirely regaining control of himself. "Well, monsieur, under this uniform beats one of the bravest and noblest hearts in the army." "Oh, Monsieur le Comte," said Morel, interrupting. "Let me continue, Captain," Albert said. "We have just been hearing of such a heroic deed by this gentleman that, even though I met him today for the first time, I would ask him the favour of introducing him to you as my friend." Again, at these words, one could detect in Monte Cristo that strangely intense look, that slight blush and barely perceptible trembling of the eyelid that signalled some deep feeling in him. "Ah, monsieur has a noble heart," he said, "so much the better." This sort of exclamation... Sorry, that was kind of Monte Cristo. "Ah, monsieur has a noble heart," he said, "so much the better." This sort of exclamation, which responded to the Count's own thoughts rather than to what Albert had just said, surprised everyone, most of all Morel, who looked at Monte Cristo with astonishment. But at the same time the tone was so soft, and, for want of a better word, so soothing that, strange though the exclamation was, it would be impossible to be annoyed by it. "Why should he doubt it?" Beauchamp asked Châteaurenard. "In truth," said the latter, who, being accustomed to society and with the sharpness of his aristocratic eye, had seen everything that it was possible to see in Monte Cristo, "in truth, Albert did not deceive us. This Count is an unusual person. What do you think, Morel?" "Frankly," he said, "he has an honest eye and a pleasing voice, so I like him, despite the odd reflection he has just made regarding me." "Gentlemen," said Albert, "Germain tells me that you are served. My dear Count, allow me to show you the way." They walked silently through into the dining room, where each took his place. "Gentlemen," the Count said as he sat down, "allow me to confess something that will serve as my excuse for any impropriety on my part. I am a foreigner, and so much one that this is the first time I have been in Paris. Consequently, I know absolutely nothing of French manners, having virtually up to now practised only an Oriental style of life, which is the one most opposed to the fine traditions of Paris. I beg you, therefore, to excuse me if you find any in my behaviour which is too Turkish, too Neapolitan, or too Arabian. Having said that, gentlemen, let us dine." "How well he says all that," Beauchamp muttered. "He is undoubtedly some noble lord." "A noble lord," Debray repeated. "A noble lord of all countries, Monsieur Debray," said Chateau Renard. And I think there we shall take a break. And I've realised my internet has just been utterly rubbish. Is it watchable, or are we having to will I have to take stream down? Also, yes, thank you people who subbed. People subbed. Yes, hello Speedy, and I don't know if you've gone, but oh, you're lurking. Have a good lurk. And who subbed? Raker! Yay! Thank you for the sub. You're wonderful. And yes, have good lurking. But yes, we shall take a break, and hopefully my internet grumbles will be sorted by the time we come back. So go do break-related things, and we shall see you in about 5 minutes. Bye for... Excuse me. Bye for now. hello again. I hope that... Oh, I forgot to put a break command in chat. Whoopsie. I hope that we are all doing well. We've all had good breaks and things. I made myself a cup of tea, which is currently far too hot for me to drink. But I did it. And I also now have the taste of off milk in my mouth, which is revolting. Because, yeah, just opened a bottle of milk. Turns out the entire bottle was off. So that was horrible. But yes, I hope everybody is doing all right. Yeah. And looking back on the conversation, yeah, I've just seen the TLJ Dungeons and Dragons little plushies. They look adorable. But yeah, I hope everybody has been enjoying the story so far. I apologise for any buffering because it seems that my internet is still having a time. So yeah, sorry if it's a bit unwatchable, but the VOD should be fine. I think that's how VODs work. I'm still not entirely sure. You're running between the PC and the kitchen. Cool. Hi, running between the PC and the kitchen. Oh, you haven't seen them yet. Oh, okay, you'll have to have a look in the Discord. Yes. Apologies if there is some buffering, but for the VOD goblins out there, you should be fine, I think, in the VOD. Oh, just as I say that, the internet goes into the red again. But what I shall do is I shall read one more chapter, which is, I think, quite a bit shorter than the one I've just read, and I'll probably call it a night there, if that is all right with everyone. And now I just have to remember where we were. Oh, I think the last chapter was meant to be bad. A chapter like 49 instead of 39. No. Wait, what? Oh. Oh, flippin' heck. Roman numerals are weird, guys. Anyway, let us continue. With, I think, chapter 40. Breakfast. It will be remembered that the Count was an abstemious guest. Albert made the observation while expressing a fear that, from the start, Parisian life might not displease the traveller with respect to its least spiritual, yet, at the same time, most necessary side. "My dear Count," he said, "you see me prey to an anxiety, which is that the cuisine of the Rue d'Elder may not please you as much as that of the Piazza di Spagna. I should have inquired about your taste and had some dishes prepared to suit your fancies." "If you knew me better, monsieur," the Count replied with a smile, "you would not concern yourself with an attention which is almost humiliating for a traveller who has lived in turn with macaroni in Naples, polenta in Milan, olla podrida in Valencia, pilaf in Constantinople, curry in India, and birds' nests in China. There is no such thing as a cuisine for a cosmopolitan like myself. I eat everything, everywhere, but little. And today, when you reproach me with my abstinence, I am in fact indulging my appetite. For I have not eaten since yesterday morning." "What, not since yesterday morning?" the guests exclaimed. "You have not eaten for 24 hours?" "No," Monte Cristo replied. "I was obliged to make a detour and ask for some information near Naples. This delayed me slightly, and I did not want to stop." "Did you not eat in your carriage?" asked Morcerf. "No, I slept, as I am accustomed to do when I am bored but do not have the strength to amuse myself, or when I am hungry without having the desire to eat." "Can you control sleep then, monsieur?" asked Morel. "More or less." "Do you have a recipe for that?" "An infallible one." "It would be invaluable to me, who do not always have anything to eat and seldom have anything to drink," said Morel. "Yes," said Monte Cristo. "Unfortunately, my preparation, while excellent for a man like myself who leads a quite exceptional life, would be very dangerous if given to an army which would not wake up when it was needed. Can we know the recipe? Asked Debray. Indeed, yes, said Monte Cristo. There is no secret. It is a mixture of excellent opium which I brought myself from Canton so that I could be quite certain it was pure, and the best hashish harvested in the East, namely that which comes from between the Tigris and the Euphrates. These two ingredients are mixed in equal proportions and shaped into pills which can be taken when needed. The result follows within 10 minutes. Ask Baron Franz d'Epinay. I think he tried it once. Yes, Morcerf replied. He mentioned it to me and has a very pleasant memory of the occasion. And do you always carry this drug with you? Asked Beauchamp, who, as a journalist, was very incredulous. Always, said Monte Cristo. Would it be indiscreet to ask you to show us these precious pills? Beauchamp continued, hoping to catch the stranger out. Not at all, monsieur, said the Count, and he took out of his pocket a wonderful pill-box formed out of a single emerald and closed by a gold screw, which, when it was loosened, allowed to emerge a small greenish ball about the size of a pea. The ball had a pervasive acrid smell. There were 4 or 5 others like it inside the emerald, which might have been able to contain a dozen of them. This pill-box was passed around the table, but This pill-box was passed around the table, but this was much more so that the splendid emerald itself could be examined than to see or sniff the pills that the guests passed from one to another. Is it your cook who prepares this delicacy? Asked Beauchamp. No, monsieur. I do not entrust my real pleasures to unworthy hands. I am a good enough chemist to prepare the pills myself. This is a splendid emerald and the largest I have ever seen, even though my mother has some quite remarkable family jewels, said Château-Renard. I had 3 like that, Monte Cristo went on. I gave one to the Sultan, who had it mounted on his sword. I gave the second to our Holy Father the Pope, who had it incrusted into his tiara opposite an emerald that was more or less similar, though not so beautiful, which had been given to his predecessor, Pius VII, by the Emperor Napoleon. I kept the third for myself and had it hollowed out, thus diminishing its value by half, but fitting it better for the use I wished to make of it. Everyone looked at Monte Cristo with astonishment. He spoke so unaffectedly that it was clear either that he was speaking the truth or that he was mad. But the emerald which had remained in his hands naturally inclined one to the first supposition. "And what did those 2 sovereigns give you in exchange for this marvellous present?" asked Debray. "The Sultan gave me a woman's freedom," the Count replied. "His Holiness, the life of a man. In this way, once in my existence, I was as powerful as if God had allowed me to be born on the steps of a throne." "It was Peppino that you freed, wasn't it?" Morcerf cried. "He was the one who benefited from your pardon." "Perhaps," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "Monsieur le Comte, you have no idea how much pleasure I feel in hearing you say that," said Morcerf. "I had already let my friends know in advance that you were a fabulous being, like an enchanter from the 1001 Nights or a sorcerer of the Middle Ages, but Parisians are people whose wits are so used to paradoxes that they mistake the most undeniable truths for mere figments of the imagination, if these truths do not conform in every respect to the conditions of their daily lives. For example, Debray here reads, and Beauchamp prints day by day that a late-returning member of the Jockey Club has been stopped and robbed on the boulevards, and that 4 people have been murdered in the Rue Saint-Denis or the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and that 10, 15, or 20 thieves have been arrested in a café on the Boulevard du Temple or in the Terme de Julien. Yet they still deny the existence of bandits in the Maremma, the Roman Campagna, or the Pontine marshes. So tell them yourself, I beg you, Monsieur le Comte, how I was captured by those bandits, and that, in all probability, without your generous intervention, I should today be awaiting my eternal resurrection in the catacombs of Saint-Sebastian, instead of giving them dinner in my unworthy little house in the Rue des Helder." "Pah!" said Monte Cristo. "You promised me never to speak of that trifle." "Not I, Monsieur le Comte," cried Morcerf. "That was someone else to whom you must have rendered the same service, and whom you are confusing with me. Let us, on the contrary, speak of it, I beg you, for if you decide to talk about the circumstances of this affair, perhaps you will not only tell me a little of what I know, but also a good deal that I do not." The Count smiled. "It seems to me that you played a large enough part in the business to know as well as I do what happened." "Will you promise me," said Morcerf, "that if I tell you all that I know, you will tell me in turn everything that I do not know?" "More than fair," said Monte Cristo replied. "Well, then, even at the expense of my vanity," Morcerf proceeded, "for 3 days I thought myself to be the object of the coquetry of a masked lady whom I took for some descendant of Tullia or Poppaea, when in fact I was purely and simply the victim of the provocative manoeuvres of a contadina, and note that I say contadina to avoid calling her a peasant. All that I know is that, naive as I was, still more naive than the person I just mentioned, I mistook for the same peasant girl a young bandit of 15 or 16, beardless, narrow-waisted, who at the very moment when I wanted to take the liberty of planting a kiss on his chaste shoulder, put a pistol to my throat, and, with the help of 7 or 8 of his companions, led me, or dragged me, into the very depths of the catacombs of Saint Sebastian, where I met a very cultured chief bandit, who, damn it, was reading Caesar's commentaries, but deigned to interrupt his reading to tell me that if, on the following morning at 6 o'clock, I had not put 4,000 écus into his coffers, then on the same day at 6:15, I should quite simply have ceased to exist. There is a letter to prove it in the possession of France, signed by me with a postscript by Luigi Vampa. If you doubt my word, I can write to France, who will verify the signatures. That is all I know. Now, what I do not know is how you, Monsieur le Comte, managed to inspire so much respect in these Roman bandits who respect so little else. I must admit to you that France and I were totally overcome with admiration." "Nothing could be simpler, monsieur," the Count replied. "I had known the celebrated Vampa for more than 10 years. One day, when he was quite young and still a shepherd, I gave him some gold coin. I gave him some gold coin or other because he had shown me the way, and so that he would not be indebted to me, he gave me in return a dagger which he had carved, and which you must have seen in my collection of weapons. Later, either because he had forgotten this small exchange of presents between us, or because he did not recognize me, he tried to arrest me, but I turned the tables on him and captured him myself with a dozen of his men. I might have delivered him to the justice of Rome, which is swift and would have been even more expeditious in this case, but I did not. Instead, I let him and his followers go." "On condition that they sinned no more?" said the journalist, laughing. "I am pleased to say that they scrupulously kept their word." "No, monsieur," Monte Cristo replied, "on the simple condition that they would always respect me and mine. Perhaps what I am about to say will appear strange to you gentlemen, socialists, progressives, humanitarians as you are, but I never worry about my neighbour. I never try to protect society which does not protect me. Indeed, I might add, which generally takes no heed of me except to do me harm. And since I hold them low in my esteem and remain neutral towards them, I believe that society and my neighbour are in my debt." "At last!" Chateau Renaud exclaimed. "Here is the first brave man whom I have heard frankly and unashamedly preaching egoism. That is excellent. Bravo, Monsieur le Comte." At least it is honest," said Morel, "but I am sure that Monsieur le Comte does not regret once at least having acted contrary to the principles that he has just described to us in such a positive manner." "How did I act contrary to those principles, monsieur?" asked Monte Cristo, who had been unable to prevent himself looking from time to time at Maximilien so attentively that the bold young man had already had to lower his eyes before the clear and penetrating gaze of the Count. It seems to me, said Morel, that by delivering Monsieur de Morcerf, who is unknown to you, you served both your neighbour and society. Of which he is the finest ornament, Beauchamp said gravely, emptying a glass of champagne in a single gulp. Monsieur le Comte, Morcerf exclaimed, here you are, caught in a logical argument. You, possessor of one of the most rigidly logical minds I have ever encountered, and you will see what is about to be clearly demonstrated to you, namely that, far from being an egoist, you are, on the contrary, a philanthropist. Oh, Count, you call yourself an Oriental, a Levantine, a Malay, an Indian, a Chinese. You use Monte Cristo as your family name and Sinbad the Sailor as your Christian name, and yet look what happens on the very day you set foot in Paris. Instinctively you possess the finest and worst quality of us eccentric Parisians, which is to lay claim to the vices that you do not have, and to hide the virtues that you do. My dear Vicomte, said Monte Cristo, I can see not a single word in all that I have said or done to merit the supposed praise that I have just received from you and from these gentlemen. You were not a stranger to me. I knew you, for I had relinquished 2 rooms to you. I had given you lunch. I had lent you one of my carriages. We had watched the masks go past together in the Corso, and we watched out of a window in the Piazza del Popolo that execution which had such a strong effect on you that you were almost taken ill by it. I appeal to all these gentlemen. Could I leave my guests in the hands of those frightful bandits, as you call them? In any case, I had, as you know, a personal interest in saving you, which was to use you to introduce me into polite society in Paris when I came to France. At one time you may have considered that intention as merely a vague and fleeting project, but today, as you see, it is entirely real, and you must submit, or else fail to keep your word. I shall keep it, said Morcerf, but I am afraid that you will be very disappointed, my dear Count, accustomed as you are to mountainous terrain, picturesque events, and fabulous horizons. Here you will encounter not the slightest excitement of the kind to which your adventurous life has accustomed you. Our Chimborazo is Montmartre, our Himalayas, the Mont Valérien, and our great desert, the Plain de Rennell. Indeed, they are digging an artesian well there, for the caravans to have water. We do have thieves, quite a few as it happens, though not as many as people say, but these thieves fear the meanest copper's nark infinitely more than they do the greatest peer of the realm. Finally, France is such a prosaic country, and Paris such a highly civilized city, that in all our 85 départements, I say 85 because of course I do not count Corsica as part of France, in all our 85 départements you will not find the smallest mountain without its telegraph, or a single cave with the least blackness inside it, in which some police commissioner has not put a gaslight. So, my dear Count, there is only one service that I can perform for you, and I am entirely at your disposal. It goes without saying that I shall introduce you everywhere, or have you introduced by my friends. In any case, you have no need of that. Your name, your fortune, and your wit, Monte Cristo bowed with a faintly ironic smile, will mean that you can present yourself anywhere with no further introduction, and be well received. In reality, there is only one way in which I can serve you. If my experience of Parisian life and its comforts, or my acquaintance with the market, may recommend me to you, then I am at your disposal to find you a suitable house. I would not dare to offer to let you share in my lodgings as I shared yours in Rome. I, who do not profess egoism, but am a perfect egoist. For here there is no room to house even a shadow apart from myself, unless it were the shadow of a woman. Ah, that is a very conjugal exception, said the Count. And indeed, monsieur, I believe you said something to me in Rome about a projected marriage? Should I congratulate you on your future happiness? The matter is under consideration, Monsieur le Comte. Which means perhaps, said Debray. Not at all, Morcerf replied. My father is anxious for it to take place, and I shortly expect to introduce you, if not to my wife, at least to my fiancée, Mademoiselle Eugène Danglars. Eugène Danglars? The Count exclaimed. One moment, isn't her father Baron Danglars. Yes, Morcerf replied, but recently created baron. What does that matter? Monte Cristo replied, if he has rendered the state some service that deserved the distinction. He did indeed, said Beauchamp. Although a liberal by instinct, he arranged a loan of 6 million francs in 1829 for King Charles X, who made him a baron no less, and Knight of the Legion of Honour, which means that he wears the ribbon, not, as you might think, in the buttonhole of his waistcoat, but quite plainly on his coat itself. Morcerf laughed. Come now, Beauchamp, my good fellow, keep that for Le Corsaire and Le Charivari, but in my presence at least spare my future father-in-law. Then he turned back to Monte Cristo. But you mentioned him a moment ago as if you knew him. I don't, Monte Cristo said in an offhand manner, but it seems likely that I shall shortly make his acquaintance, since I have a credit opened on him by the firms of Richard and Blount of London, Arnstein and Escales in Vienna, and Thomson and French in Rome. As he spoke the last two names, Monte Cristo looked out of the corner of his eye at Maximilien Morrel. Perhaps he expected to produce some effect on the young man, and if so, he was not disappointed. Maximilien shuddered as though he had received an electric shock. Thomson and French? He asked. Do you know that firm, monsieur? They are my bankers in the Eternal City, the Count replied calmly. Can I be of service to you regarding them? Monsieur le Comte, perhaps you might help us to solve a problem that has so far proved insoluble. That firm once did our own a great service, and yet I don't know why, always denies having done so. I shall look into it, monsieur, the Count said, bowing. But the subject of Monsieur Danglars has taken us a long way, Morcerf said, from the matter in hand, which was to find suitable accommodation for the Count of Monte Cristo. Come now, gentlemen, let's put our heads together. Where shall we house this newly arrived guest of our great city? In the Faubourg Saint-Germain, said Château-Renard. There the Count will find a charming, secluded little private house. Château-Renard, said Debray, you know nothing beyond that gloomy and melancholy Faubourg Saint-Germain of yours. Don't listen to him, Monsieur le Comte. Find somewhere in the Chaussée d'Antin. That is the true centre of Paris. The Boulevard de l'Opéra, said Beauchamp. On the first floor, an apartment with a balcony. There the Count can have them bring his cushions embroidered in silver thread, and while he smokes his chibouque or swallows his pills, he can watch the whole city pass before his eyes. Morrel, don't you have any suggestions? Asked Château-Renard. Have you no ideas? Yes, certainly I do, the young man said, smiling, but I was waiting to see if monsieur was tempted by any of the fine offers that have just been made. Now, since he has not replied, I think I might venture to offer him an apartment in a charming little house in Pompadour style, which my sister has been renting for the past year in the Rue Meslay. You have a sister? Monte Cristo asked. Yes, Count, the most excellent sister. Married? For the past 9 years. Is she happy? The Count continued. As happy as any human creature may be, Maximilien replied. She married the man whom she loved, the man who had remained loyal to us in our times of misfortune, Emmanuel Herbault. Monte Cristo gave a faint smile. I am staying there while I am on leave, Maximilien continued, and with that same brother-in-law, Emmanuel, I shall be at the Count's disposal for any information he might require. One moment, Albert exclaimed, before Monte Cristo had time to reply. Be careful, Monsieur Morrel. You are trying to cage a traveller, Sinbad the sailor, in the prison of family life. Here is a man who came to see Paris, and you want to make him a patriarch. Not at all, Morrel replied with a smile. My sister is 25 and my brother-in-law 30. They are young, merry and contented. In any case, the Count will be free to do as he wishes. He will only meet his hosts when he chooses to come down and do so. Thank you, monsieur, thank you, said Monte Cristo. It will be enough for me to be introduced to your sister and your brother-in-law, if you wish to do me that honour, but the reason I did not accept the offers of any of these gentlemen is that I have already arranged for somewhere to live."
"What?" Morcerf exclaimed. "You are going to stay in a hotel? That would be so very gloomy indeed for you."
"Was I so ill-housed in Rome?" Monte Cristo asked.
"Ha! In Rome?" Morcerf said. "You spent 50,000 piastres in furnishing an apartment for yourself, but I don't suppose you are prepared to spend that every day."
"It was not the expense that deterred me," Monte Cristo replied, "but I was resolved to have a house in Paris, a house of my own, you understand. I sent my valet on ahead of me, and he must have brought me this house and had it furnished."
"Are you telling us that you have a valet who knows Paris?" Beauchamp exclaimed.
"Like me, he is visiting France for the first time," Monte Cristo replied. At this there was general surprise.
"So it must be Ali," Albert ventured.
"Yes, Monsieur Ali himself, whom I believe you saw in Rome."
"Certainly, I recall him very well. But why did you make him responsible for buying you a house in Paris and furnishing it? He would have got everything back to front, the poor fellow."
"Not at all, monsieur. I am certain, on the contrary, that he will have chosen everything in accordance with my tastes, because, you know, my tastes are not shared by everyone. He got here a week ago, and he will have crisscrossed the town with the instincts of a good hunting dog hunting alone. He knows my whims, my caprices, my needs. He will have arranged everything as I want it. He knew that I would be arriving today at 10 o'clock, and since 9 he has been waiting for me at the Fontainebleau gate. He handed me this paper with my new address on it. Here, read it." Monte Cristo passed the paper across to Albert, who read, "Number 30 Champs-Élysées." "That's really novel," Beauchamp exclaimed involuntarily. "And very princely," Chateau Renard added. "What, you truly don't know your house?" Debray asked. "No," said Monte Cristo. "As I told you, I did not want to miss our appointment. I shaved and dressed in the carriage and got out at the Viscount's door." The young men exchanged glances. They did not know whether Monte Cristo was play-acting, but everything that this man said, despite his eccentricity, was delivered in such a simple tone that it was impossible to suspect him of lying. And, for that matter, why should he lie? "So we must make do," Beauchamp said, "with ensuring that the Count has all the other little things that we are able to give him. For my part, as a journalist, I offer him all the theatres of Paris." "I thank you, monsieur," said Monte Cristo with a smile, "but my butler has already been ordered to rent me a box in each of them."
"Is your butler also Ali?"
Debray asked. "No, sir, merely one of your compatriots, if a Corsican can be said to be anyone's compatriot. But you know him, Monsieur de Morcerf."
"Not by any chance the good Signor Bertuccio, who is so expert at hiring windows?"
"The very same. You met him at my house on the day when I had the honour to invite you to luncheon. He is an excellent fellow who is something of a soldier, something of a smuggler, and, in short, a little of all that one can be. I would not swear to it that he has not been in trouble with the police over some trifle, like a knifing, say." "And you choose this honest citizen of the world as your butler, Count?" Debray said. "How much does he steal from you every year?" "You have my word on it, no more than any other, I'm sure. He is just what I need. He never takes no for an answer, and I'm keeping him."
"Well then," said Chateau Renard, "you have a household already, a mansion on the Champs-Élysées, servants, a butler. The only thing lacking is a mistress."
Albert smiled, thinking of the beautiful Greek woman whom he had seen in the Count's box at the Teatro Valle in the Argentina. "I have something better than that," Monte Cristo replied. "I have a slave. You hire your mistresses at the Théâtre de l'Opéra, at the Vaudeville, at the Variété. I bought mine in Constantinople.
She was more expensive, but I have no further worries on that score. Debray laughed. You are forgetting that here, as King Charles said, we are Franks by name and frank by nature. As soon as she set foot in France, your slave became free.
Who will tell her? Asked Monte Cristo.
Heavens, anybody who comes along.
She only speaks Romaic.
Ah, that's another matter. Shall we see her at least? Asked Beauchamp. Or, having already one dumb servant, do you also have eunuchs?
No, certainly not, said Monte Cristo. I do not take my Orientalism that far. All those around me are free to leave, and will have no further need of me or anyone else. Perhaps that is why they do not leave me. They had long since moved on to the desert. They had long since moved on to the dessert and the cigars.
My dear fellow, Debray said, getting up, it's 2:30 and your guest is charming, but there is no company so good as that one leaves, even sometimes for worse. I must go back to my ministry. I shall speak of the Count to the minister, and we must find out who he is. Take care, said Morcerf. Cleverer men have given up the search. We have a budget of 3 million for intelligence. Admittedly, it is almost always spent in advance, but no matter, there will still be 50,000 for this. And when you know who he is, will you tell me?
I promise.
Au revoir, Albert. Gentlemen, your most humble servant. As he left, Debray cried out loudly in the antechamber, "Bring my carriage!" Very well, Beauchamp told Albert. I shall not go to the house, but offer my readers something better than a speech by Monsieur Danglars. I beg you, Beauchamp, Morcerf said, not a word, I pray. Don't deprive me of the credit for introducing him and explaining him. Isn't he an odd fellow? Better than that, replied Château-Renard, one of the most extraordinary men I have ever seen. Morel, are you coming?
I must just give my card to Monsieur le Comte, who has kindly promised to visit us at 14 Rue Meslay.
You may be sure that I shall not fail to do so, monsieur, the Count said with a bow. And Maximilien Morel went out with the Baron de Château-Renard, leaving Monte Cristo alone with Morcerf.